Hello and welcome to part 2 of episode 3 where we build the GUI for the office line generator. Now one thing that I saw in the last part that I accidentally did wrong is inside our quote display here I accidentally did quote.season twice, so it should actually be quote.episode here for the episode number. So just change that and then we're ready to move on. Now in today's episode I want to focus on the color schemes for the background and making the background and animations for it so that the page will look good, and we are ready then to move on in episode 4 with doing the authentication of the system. So the first thing I want to create is a helper function and a util file for, let's see, in source here, for getting our color schemes. So you're going to create a utils folder, and inside it you're going to create a file called colorpalettes.js. Now I'm just going to copy in this code because it's a lot to write on your own, and I'm going to try to explain it because it's a lot of math and I'm not 100% sure how to explain it, but I'm going to try my best. So the first thing I wanted to create is some base colors for the main characters, and I have done this by creating an object here. So for example, Michael and Pam and all of the main characters is going to have a color that the gradient is going to be based on. And this was just because if we have it completely random, then it might not really fit the main characters, and these show up the most, so I thought it would be nice. So you can pick your own colors or you can just copy it in. Now for the rest of the characters that's not one of these, it's going to be just a random color scheme based on their string value. So the first function that we're going to create is a helper function, because we need to turn our hex values, these color values, into HSL. And HSL stands for hue, saturation, and light. So we need to format them into HSL instead, because then it will be much easier to create color palettes that we can make good gradients from it. Yeah, so the first is a helper function here, which will turn our hex values into HSL format. So we're going to pass in our hex value, and then we're going to remove the hashtag from it. So this is just a regex to remove the hashtag. And then we're going to calculate how much red, green, and blue are in these hex values. So it's going to take each part of the value, and it's going to calculate it on a scale of 0 to 1, how much red, how much green, how much blue it is. Okay? And then we're going to calculate the max and the min values of these. So we're going to get if it's the most red, if red is the dominant color, or if it's green or blue, and what is the least. And then we're just going to set our hue, saturation, and lightness to the middle of max plus min. And then we're going to check if max in fact is the same as min, then all the colors will be the same. Then it's just going to be a gray color, and we can set hue and saturation to 0. If it's not, if there are in fact some dominant color, then we're going to calculate the difference between max and min. And then we're going to do this formula for calculation the saturation. And this is just going to check if the lightness is bigger or smaller than 0.5. And if it's bigger, then we're going to do this calculation. And if it's smaller, then we're going to do this calculation. So now we have our saturation, and now we're going to calculate our hue. And we're going to put in the max value, the dominant color, and then we're going to check if it was red, green, and blue. And then we make these calculations depending on which it was. And now this is going to turn out for red to either be -4 or 0. And then we're either going to add 6 or 0. So we're going to get the value of 0 to 2 here. For green, we're going to get the value of 2 to 4. And for blue, we're going to get the value between 4 and 6. But now we want it on the color wheel, and the wheel is 360 degrees, so we need to multiply it by 60. So the minimum value we're going to get is 0 times 60, which is just going to be 0, or the maximum is 6 times 60, which is 360, so we're going to get somewhere on the scale. And then we're just going to return rounded up our hue, our saturation in percentage, and our lightness in percentage. So yeah, that is the whole helper function here. Now we have another function, and this is to calculate and get our color palette for our gradient. So we're going to take in 3 parameters here, a string. And this is for the non-main characters. So like if you have Susan, for example, which is not in my color palette, then it's just going to be the string Susan that gets passed in here. Then we have a count, and this is set to how many colors we want, and the default is 5. And we're going to use 5 in this system, but you can set it to whatever you want. And then we're going to pass in a base hue if we have one, and this is for our main characters, the thing that we calculated from our helper function. Yeah. So first we're going to check if our base hue is a hex, if we have passed in a main character from it. So then we're going to get our HSL format from our helper function. And then we're going to create a empty array to store our colors. And then we're going to loop through each count. So like in the default case 5 times. And then we're going to push into our color array in the HSL format. And we're going to shift by every count 12 degrees, so we get some difference in the colors. And it's going to be between 0 and 359. Because it's on the colors wheel scheme that I said before, and we're just going to have the saturation and lightness. It's going to be the same. And then we're just going to return our color array. So we're going to get a color array of 5 HSL colors. Now, let's say we haven't passed in a main character, it's some other character like Susan, for example. Then we will not have a base hue in a hex format. We're just going to have a string instead. So now we need another calculation here. So we first initialize hash and set it to 0 just to start off. And then we loop through each character of the string. So like for Susan, it's going to be 5 characters. And then we do a calculation here based on the Unicode that is going to turn our text into a reproducible number. So Susan and let's say Kevin, now Kevin is a main character, but it's another name, is going to get a different number here. I hope that makes sense. So for each non-main character, we're going to get a random number here. But it's always going to be the same for that string. So Susan will always have the same number here. Yeah. And then we check if we didn't have any base hue, and then we're going to calculate it based on our hash, based on this number. And it's going to be between 0 and 359, so it stays on the color wheel. And then we're going to do the same here by creating a colors array. And we're going to loop through each count to see how many colors we want. And we're going to calculate the hue, and we're going to start at what it is, and then we're going to add 12 degrees for every count, just like we did before, and it's going to stay on the color wheel here. And then we have saturation, which we're going to have a base value of 30, and then we're going to add a number between 0 and 24. And this is going to give a final value of between 30 and 54, and this will ensure that we don't get too extreme saturation. So it's not going to be too gray or not too vivid. So it's going to be a good mix here. And then we have lightness, and we're going to do the same, but we're going to have a base value of 40, and we're going to add a value between 0 and 29 based on the hash. And this will make sure that it's not too dark and not too bright. And then we're going to push them into the array in the same format with the hue, saturation, and lightness, and then we're just going to return them. So yeah, this is the color palettes file. Okay, so now that we're done with our color palettes, we can create a component that we're going to need, and this is going to be for our background. So we're going to create a new component, call it gradient border.jsx. Inside here, we're going to have to import motion from FrameMotion to be able to create our animations that we want for our background. So we are going to define our component here, gradient border, and we're going to pass into it 2 parameters. One is gradient, and this we will get from our color palettes file. Another is children, and this is going to be the content that we want to appear inside our box. Like this. The first thing we're going to create is a div with some classes. We're going to have relative. Then we're going to have p1, which is some small padding. We're going to have rounded to XL. And this is just going to give us some round corners on it. And we're going to set overflow to visible. And this will make sure that it isn't clipped when it moves outside the viewport. Yeah, so that is that div. Inside here, we're going to have a motion div, which we're going to animate. So we're going to put an animate attribute, and we're going to set it to rotate 360. And this is going to rotate it 360 degrees. Now for transition, we're going to set it to, repeat infinity. And this is going to infinitely repeat our animation. We're going to have a duration of 20. So it's going to do one full rotation every 20 seconds. And then we're going to have ease set to linear. And this will spin smoothly. Then we're going to have some classes to it. And we're going to have absolute. And we're going to have inset of 0. And this is just going to fill our parent box here. And we're going to have some rounded 2XL corners again. Let's see, we're going to have also the pointer events of none. And this is going to make sure the border doesn't block clicks, so like it doesn't hit this accidentally. Then we're going to have some styling. I'm going to set the background to be our gradient that we got from the color palettes. And we're going to set the Z index to 1. And this will ensure that it sits behind the content, but above the background. So it's going to be positioned nicely between there. And we're going to set area hidden to true. Like this. And this will hide it from screen readers because it's only visual. It doesn't really matter in the usage of the system. Now we're going to create a smaller box inside of here. So we're going to need another div with some class names. Absolute. We're going to have an inset of 1 to fill it up again. We're going to have some rounded corners. We're going to have a white background. And we're going to have a Z index of 10. And it's going to sit above the gradient layer but below the content. We also need an area hidden of true once again because it's only visual, like this. And then we're going to need another div for our content. This is going to be position relative, have some rounded corners again, white background, and a Z index of 20. And this will ensure that the content sits on top of everything else. Now inside of this div, we're going to pass in the children parameter. So this is going to be the content that we want to be displayed. So, and now it's done. So this is our whole component here. Okay, so now that we're done with the gradient border, we can move on to update our line generator component. Now, the first thing that we need to update is we need another thing from frame emotion, and that is use animation. And this will give us some more control over our animations. Now we're also going to need to import I'm just going to copy this in actually. We also need to import the new components and the functions from our color palettes here. So we're going to import gradient border and color palettes and string to colors from our util file. And the next thing that we're going to want to do is that I want some more control over the button. And to get that, we're going to have some button controls. Button controls, which is going to be use animation. And I also want to specify an audio path, And this is because when you press the button, I would like a sound to play. So I know the path, but we're gonna copy it in here shortly, but it's gonna be drop_003.ogg. So now we need to copy this over, and I'm gonna do that really quickly here. And you can find it on the GitHub repo. And inside public, we're gonna just paste it. And here we have our sound, and this is what it sounds like. Yeah. Okay. So now that we're done with that, we can move on. And now we need to update our, let's see where that is here, handle click function. Because right now it only fetches the random line, but I would like it to play a sound, play the sound first of all. So we're gonna await new audio, and we're gonna play our audio path. So when you press the button, the audio is gonna play. Then we're gonna fetch the random line. And now we also want some animations. So we're gonna use the use animations here from our buttons control. And we're gonna set some animations here. Let's see, like this. And we're gonna make it smaller first with a transition, let's see, like this, of a duration of 0.2 seconds. Yeah, and then we want another one. Sorry. And this is gonna be to make it big again. Of also the same duration here, 0.2. Yeah. So first it's gonna shrink to a scale of 0.8, and this will give like a press effect, and then it's gonna grow back to normal with a scale of 1. I have something wrong here, let's see. Yeah, I forgot this. Yeah. Okay, so now our handle click is done. Now we actually want to get the colors for our gradient. So the first thing we need is our base hue. And we're gonna check if quote is set to something. And if it is, then we're gonna call our color palettes function. No, sorry, we're gonna get the color palettes object. It's not a function. And inside here, we're gonna get the quote.character. So for example, if it's Michael, then we're gonna get that. And we're gonna check if that exists. And if it does, then we're gonna get the first color from it. There is only one, but it's good to do this. Or else we're gonna get null. So let's say, for example, that our quote.character contains Michael. Michael is our main character. It's gonna be in our color palettes. It's gonna get its color. If it has Susan, Susan is not in our color palettes, then it's gonna return null. So base hue will either be null or Michael's color right now. Yeah, the next part we want to calculate is our colors. We are once again gonna check if quote exists, if it's set to something. Then we're gonna call our string to colors function. We're gonna pass in our character, like Michael, for example, character. We're gonna pass in how many colors we want. This is default to 5, but I'm gonna pass in 5 anyway. And we're gonna pass in our base hue, so Michael's color, or null. So if we don't have a quote, we're not gonna do anything here. So if we have Michael here for colors, for example, we're gonna call a string to colors function with Michael, 5 colors and a color. And if we have Susan, we're gonna call it with Susan as the string, 5 colors and null as base hue. So it's gonna calculate it like we did in string to colors. Now we also need a gradient for this. And we're gonna check if we have defined colors. And if we have, then we're gonna make a gradient of it. So let's see, with these, conic gradient. And we're gonna use our colors here. Colors.join, so we're gonna use our array of colors. And we're gonna join them by a comma. Or if colors is not defined, we're gonna make a, let's see, like this, a default conic gradient. Of just a black color to a slightly less black color. Now let's see, like this. Yeah. So we're either going to get a gradient from our character or just a black if we don't have a character. Yep. I hope that's pretty understandable. Now, I also want our content to be able to shrink if the quote is really long. So like if you have a really long quote, I want the whole like box to shrink so that you can see it clearly and it doesn't take up the whole screen. So for that we need another function, and we're gonna create it and call it scale, get scale for quote. And we're gonna pass in our quote as a parameter like this. And first we're gonna check if, let's see if we don't have a quote, if there is no quote at line, sorry. And if there isn't, we're just going to return a 1, and I will explain it in a second. So it's going to stay the same scale. So for example, if we don't have a quote, it's just going to stay the same scale. It's not going to modify it any. And then we're going to calculate the length of our q.line. Like this. And then we're going to check if the length is more than 120, so it's going to be a really long quote, then we're going to return a value of 0.85. So then the content is going to scale down to 85%. Now if it's smaller than 120, but it's still bigger than 80, then we're going to return 0.9. So it's going to scale down to 90%. And if it's smaller than 80, but it's bigger than 40, then we're going to return 0.95. And else we're going to just return a 1. So if it's smaller than 40 words, then it's just going to stay the same scale. If it's bigger than 40, it's going to scale down depending on how big it is. Yeah, so I hope that's pretty straightforward. Then we need to actually get our scale. So we're just going to call this function with our quote. So yeah, that is that. And now we just need to update our element that we return. So we need to wrap our whole card in this animated gradient border. So under main, but above header, we're going to add our gradient border component. And we're going to set its gradient to be the gradient that we calculated earlier. Now we're also going to need a motion.section. And this is going to have some animations on it. So first we have layout, and we're going to have an initial set to opacity of 0 and a scale of 0.98. We're going to have an animation to make it opacity 1 and the scale that we set earlier. So it's going to be the scale of the scale. So we're going to start a little bit smaller, and then we're going to either shrink or grow into the scale that we set. And then we're going to have an exit animation for when the quote disappears. Opacity of 0 and a scale of 0.98. So it's going to shrink a bit and disappear. And then we're going to have a transition with a duration of 0.5 and ease of ease in out. Okay, now we also need some classes. We're going to have some different sizes depending on the screen size so that it stays responsive. Like this, and on medium screens it's going to be like this. And then we need some rounded corners again. We want a drop shadow, some padding, and on smaller screens we want some more padding. And we want to center the text. Then I want to set the tab index to -1. Like this. So with that done, we can move on. We can close it first of all. And these two we want to move down because these are gonna encapsulate the rest of the components. So like here, and we can format this in a second. Yeah, so that's great. Now we can continue down to our button, which we also need to update. So here we want some animations as well. For animations, we're gonna use our button controls that we defined earlier. Like this. We're gonna set some effects while we hover it. We're gonna set its scale to be a little bit bigger. So when you hover it, it's gonna get a little bit bigger. And then while you are tapping it, we're gonna set it to a little bit smaller. So while you hover it, it's gonna get bigger, and then while you press it, it's gonna get smaller. One click, handle click, disabled, and the class names are all fine. And that is it. Now I'm just gonna format this. And we are done. Now we can test it. Okay, so I actually tested this code and it didn't work. So I've done some debugging and I found a couple of issues that we need to fix. So inside this line generator, I accidentally wrote the wrong class name here. There's going to be a colon here instead of a underscore in the motion.section. And then also in the button, it is, let's see, was it in the button? No, where was it? Here, in the motion.div here. It's items center, not item. Okay, so now line generator should be fine, but we also need to fix in gradient border because I accidentally did a brackets here when it should be a parenthesis so that we actually return something. Like this. So if you fix this, then you can start your frontend, or you can rebuild it if you want to check for other errors by npm run build, but I'm just gonna start it with npm run dev. And here you can see our background, which is spinning, and since we don't have a character right now, the background is just the black that we set. And then when we generate the quote, it will change to the character's color. So this is Jim's colors, and as you can see, the display scales depending on how big the quote is. And I said wrong before, it's not scaling on how many words it is, it's characters. So yeah, so now we're finished with our GUI, and now the only thing left is to add authentication with Keycloak, which we're going to do in the next episode. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in episode 4.